the role of an editor is to acknowledge that writers are so immersed in the story they're creating that they see it clearly in their head and they're seeing it clearly from the inside out. And I think the role of an editor is really to step in on behalf of that audience and look at it from the outside in.
Hello and welcome to the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. And I've got a good one for you today. I have a few guests in the Zoom studio with me. And before I introduce them, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce the premise of this independent comic book series that they've been working on together called California Inc., which essentially chronicles a near future when California becomes a corporate country with a number of different factions fighting to shape this new nation. So we've already got a great log line, which I did not write, but I've invited the California Inc. team on the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast today to share with me about their series finale. We're talking about issue number 4 of a 4-issue miniseries, which launches on Kickstarter concurrently with this podcast episode. So if you're hearing these words, the campaign is live. You can find that in the show notes of today's episode, or you can simply search California Inc. That's INC, not INK, California Inc. on Kickstarter, and you'll find it straight away. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Dave Law, California Inc. artist, Justin Giampaoli, series editor, and Art Ebuen, writer, and I'm just going to say it, the mastermind behind this project, because I remember when you were toting around a script for this book at Comic-Con International a few years back, Art, and here we are with a completed series. So maybe we can start by each one of you introducing yourself and your role. I know I did that very briefly right now, but let's expand that a little bit. So let's go popcorn, Art, then Dave, then Justin. Art, what are you doing with this series? Introduce yourself, and then we'll move on from there.
My name's Art Ebuen. I'm the writer and producer, publisher of this thing. That's pretty much it. I mean, no, I'm sure there's more, but we'll get into that later. Wrote this as Ryan said a few years back. Was actually, I think, might have picked your brain a couple times too during the conventions since actually before meeting Dave, just to kind of like get some ideas of how to get this going. And as you mentioned earlier, how surreal. It's we're on issue 4 after all these years of trying to just get it done. And thanks to Dave and Justin.
Cool. Thank you, Art. Dave, how about you? Can you tell us about your role on California Inc.?
Yeah, my name is Dave Law, and I'm the artist. I did all the interior art and the character design, and the majority of the standard covers of California Inc. Spent the last couple of years of my life slaving away at this book. So yeah, it feels great to see that it come to conclusion. It's almost like Art said, feels kind of surreal when I finished that last page. It's just a hair under 100 pages, and
Ooh.
counting the covers and everything I did, it's over that. So it's a big stack of illustration board, and it's a satisfying feeling. You know, I've worked on a handful of books, but you know, this one's definitely up there as far as the volume of work that went into it. So yeah, it feels great.
Very cool. Thank you, Dave. And Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Well, I'm the series editor, and I've just found there's such a misconception about what editors do. So I've done everything from what's called development editing with Art, even kind of before he started writing, to basic copy editing, to line editing and dialogue polish. And maybe we'll have time to dive into some of those, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you guys. So we've got a Kickstarter running right now. So I want to get that in people's minds straight away, but I'd also like to talk about this series. And I've been fortunate enough to be on every single Kickstarter so far, 1 through 3. Now we're on 4. By the time you're listening to this, I will have jumped on number 4 as well. But I'm also lucky enough to have received a preview issue of number 4. So I've read the entire thing. And I've noticed a very lean storytelling approach in California Inc. So this started making a lot more sense when I heard Art mention his relationship with Justin, pitching this idea initially, and Justin coming back with comments like, hey, if this is going to be a more viable pitch, you might think about paring it down to like a 4 issue miniseries instead of what was previously a 6 issue arc, if
Hmm.
I'm doing my research correctly.
Right, you're right.
And I guess my question here is more of an invitation for a roundtable discussion about this. Like, Art, what did you have to cut? And are there any darlings that you regret leaving on the cutting room floor? And Justin, I've also heard Art talk about your no fat approach to editing. So like where's that come from? And do you ever feel confined by the constraints of a 24-page issue, wanting to let it breathe a little more? And Dave, how does this affect you as the artist too? So let's start out with Art, and I'd love to hear all of you talk about this lean approach to storytelling within California Inc.
No, that's a great question. I come from an advertising background before my illustration and animation days, but I was in advertising for about 15, 16 years. And that's how I met Justin. And it's kind of serendipity that we are in that kind of, he's in editor mode and I'm in advertising where everything has to be super limited. What can you do on like for a commercial, 30 seconds? What can you say in 30 seconds? Make it memorable, impactful, and also make someone take action. And then a billboard even, you got like the 50-50 rule. Someone's going 50 miles an hour, 50 yards away, and you get 7 words or less. How can you do that exact same thing? So it's just kind of always built into me to be as give the audience as much chance and understanding that they are smarter than you think, and they will get what you're trying to get across without overly filling in with exposition, and especially that word exposition. I'll let Justin talk about that. He has cut a lot of my exposition, even though I thought I cut it already. And I'm thankful for that because it made me much more aware, kind of like designers are aware of visual tangents. That's how I am now with exposition and overly hitting the reader over the head and just give them the uh, the the grace that, or not give them the credit they're smarter than you think. And there's some bad advertisers who say, you have to treat people like they're stupid. And I'm like, no, because if you do that, then we will think you think I'm stupid and I don't want to get your thing. So, some of my favorite stories out there is being dropped right in the middle of something and understand that I will pick it up as the story goes on. And so I kind of wanted to treat our audience that way as well.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense coming from an advertising background where everything has to be so honed. Yeah, cool. Justin, how about you and this lean approach to storytelling? Does that come naturally for you? Is it something you look for? How are you slicing up Art's work? Let's hear about this.
Yeah, I think I also just came from a very minimalist background. Whether I have written comics or now editing comics, I just really believe in that minimalism and being able to convey the ideas and the plot mechanics and the dialogue with the bare minimum amount of words. And you always hear in editing, there's this sort of infamous idea that, well, any word balloon shouldn't have more than 27 words in it. And that just feels kind of arbitrary, right? But I'm always looking to cut. And it doesn't matter to me if that script's got, a line of dialogue that's got 10 words, I'm going to try to get it down to 7. If it's got 20, I'm going to get it down to 15 and just really be able to get the most minimal, concise word count possible. The page real estate is precious. I want to let the art shine, obviously, and the more words you have cluttering up the page, the less the art's going to shine. Um, there's a really classic example in one of our California Ink issues where our letterer just inadvertently forgot to letter in a line of dialogue, and Art, caught that and made a note to the letterer, hey, we need to add this line of dialogue back in. And as I was looking at the page, I just realized, you know what? I think this actually works a lot better without the line of dialogue. Dave's art is very emotive, very expressive. And whenever there's an opportunity like that to let the art do the storytelling and the heavy lifting, I just feel like you have to embrace that. And you get these happy accidents where we cut that line of dialogue completely and the art really shines. So that's my goal ultimately. Like, gosh, if you could tell the story with, 10 words or less in the entire issue, try to aim for that, right?
So, Dave, actually, did we talk about that? I don't know if we told you about that moment. There was that, I believe it was issue 3, where no, 2, where the interrogator was talking to, sorry, it was three, where the interrogator was talking to uh, young Alona or Big Sis, and the interrogator was supposed to say something in response to the kind of threat that she got in the room, and the way you drew the interrogator, she was just smiling, like, "Oh, we got this. Like, don't worry about it." Like, it didn't phase her. But we had a line that complimented, but hit the person over the head with that feeling that it was gone, and you could just tell by your art that she was just like, mm-hmm. It was like perfect. I was like, yeah, it does make sense to knock out that line of dialogue. It was, and thanks to you.
Yeah, that was a
Oh,
great
cool.
moment. I remember the moment of which you speak in issue three too. That's really great. So, Dave, hearing stuff like that right now, like I was going to ask you about how does this affect you, but hearing that, how does that affect the way you approach art, storytelling visually? Does that change anything, or do you notice stuff like the story being very lean and think that you have to compensate, or how does that work from your perspective as the artist?
That's a good question, and I think that that balance of text and word and visual is the kind of the dance of making comic books, and I think like the you can always have more wording, more imagery, less imagery. I think all of those things play into some of the things that make comic books great and the effects that you can have with it. I think about like books like Watchmen, which has a ton of text in it, but it it all kind of it really worked for that book, and I felt like all that text was not a nuisance. But I've definitely read books where I'm rolling my eyes as I'm reading this. I'm looking at this beautiful panel, and then you have this narrator explaining what you're looking at, and you're like, "Well, this is." It just feels like it takes away the importance of those words, and you start to give that author less I think to validity or I guess trust as someone lots of times you get a comic book and you can like just enjoy the pictures and not read it. In fact, when I was younger, that was how I enjoyed a lot of comic books, and that really is not discredit to the writer. I think something like I'll think about like the GI Joe comic, the silent GI Joe comic that I think we all know of, where no words in it, but the story that unravels in it was just had me like gripped the whole time. So I think that I think that yeah, California Ink has less words in it, but in the script there's a lot going on. There's a lot of explanation, and I think that's fun. I love that challenge of being given. Okay, we're not gonna tell them what they're looking at. It's your job to convey that, and sometimes art gives me ways to convey it and things that he's thought about. Sometimes I'm like, well, what? How else can I try to do that? And I think that's what makes it fun in a lot of ways to work with art. And I feel we have a kind of a nice synergy going with that, in that we kind of can trust each other in that regard. So
Actually, today Dave just texted me about something we're working on, and he's doing his due diligence. He was like, "Hey, before I start on this thing, do you want to chat through it like we usually do?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, we haven't done that because we usually go through the script together just to kind of bounce stuff off of each other and just go, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think?" And it's a fun collaborative kind of a book like that for us.
Ah, cool. Foreshadowing. Ah, something else you're working on. All right, all right.
No, I
We'll get
mean,
there.
I
We'll
don't
get
know.
there. Uh, so, I just wanted to bounce off something that Dave said right now, which is there's a lot more going on in the script than you might see on the page in words per se. Um, and that was exemplified in one of the issues in the back matter where you gave some of that behind the scenes. Here's the script. Here's how we were working on these pages. So some really cool information in the book itself if you're interested in process, which if you're interested in my work, you probably are. So more reason to pick up California Ink. Um, Art, I've heard you talk about how this idea for California Ink felt more satirical to you when you
Mhm.
first wrote it many moons ago. And I think you said it was around 2016 that you started writing this.
Mhm.
But after hearing from so many people, not just at conventions, but I've listened to a lot of interviews with you and Dave, and it's not just once or twice, but frequently it comes up about how prescient this idea feels. And so, how has your relationship with the story changed after hearing that so frequently? Because even just pitching it to my wife right before chatting with you guys right now, like, oh, what are you doing? What's this interview about? Who's there? What's this story about? And I gave her your tagline, and she's like, "Ooh, oh." You could tell like there was this tension of feeling like, man, this is getting close-ish to reality, maybe? Question mark. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
how does that affect you? What are you feeling about that from
Just
the
call me.
origin of thinking, oh, I'm just sort of riffing off how Californians think they're better than everyone else. And now it's like, well, what does this story really mean? Like it's sort of taking on a different meaning.
That's interesting you bring that up because yes, it was kind of like a serious joke for me at the time, but
Mm.
also like am I Archstradamus? I don't know. Like it's just yeah, sorry, dad joke. But it is funny how without spoiling anything, how Justin even I think helped me write a an earlier version of the logline that did have the words like red versus blue, and it's not that. It just so happens to kind of almost somewhat make fun of it in some way or form. But it's Dave has mentioned that it does get a different um, response here in California than it does outside of California. Or
Hmm.
I know I've yet to see what it would do in the East Coast, but at the same time, I could see how any POV can see, oh, this feels like you're making it more, red or more blue. It's I'm very conscious of it. And actually, I think it was issue one, Dave. We did change a line. Um, I think you were there. We and I talked about it, even in the visuals about. I think we said our friends in the East rather than saying the specific country because, I didn't want any tension because that wasn't the point. It's not a political book. But
It's not.
I mean, it's geopolitical, but it's not. I'm not a politicized I'm not a. I don't put on my political thoughts on things like this. It is a me blowing smoke up our Californian skirts, like look at us, but also like making fun of us and like again, if we got it our way, what would we do and how would we do it, and then what would go wrong? And so, yeah, I do worry sometimes that people might think I'm pushing an agenda, which I'm not. I don't. I really don't care. I mean, I do care about things, but that's not the goal of this book specifically.
I think the California Inc. follows in like a kind of science fiction tradition of extrapolating off of kind of current world events, and you can't help but bring in the polarizing politics that are happening right now when you do that. But I think art has a great way of not only showing one side of thought but the other as well, and how complicated actually conflicts like some of the things that we're experiencing can be. And I think that's it's worth reminding people that sometimes media makes it look so black and white that it's so clearly someone's fault. And I think this book really sheds a lot of light on the fact that it really is hard to say whose fault is what and who is ultimately always the bad guy.
Yeah,
I
and
think from my
I'm sorry, go
perspective,
ahead, Justin.
Ryan, yeah, I was just going to chime in. From my perspective, honestly, I always bristle a little bit when art says it was meant to satire because I never read it that way. Um, I do agree with art, though. I don't think it is entirely a political book. I don't think the
Mm.
focus is the politics. The way I always read it was, what is the identity of California in the future?
Mhm.
It's aspirational. You have all these different characters fighting for what they want the identity of California to be. And so I try to view it in that lens. It's about the identity of the state. It's not necessarily about those red and blue politics.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and Dave, you were mentioning how it's interesting that uh, current events can kind of shape what the book is and has become. And I've even seen you talk about how you were watching particular debates and how some of that imagery came into play in the book itself. So, yeah, it's really interesting to hear that. And Dave, I also wanted to ask you what you feel as though some of your biggest contributions have been to California Inc. I know that you're the artist. I know you drew the whole darn book, but like, are you particularly proud of like character designs, or are there pieces of writing that you contributed to as the artist or shaped the way something happened? I'm curious about your involvement past just I am artist and I put on the page what art tells me to. Like, what are your real proud moments from this book?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so yeah, definitely on your first point. Yeah, I think I like taking my influences, especially like current events and kind of what is popular culture and applying it to my art. I think that, when you do that, I think more people can resonate with it, or it also gives you a taste of what, the times. I think any comic you read gives you an insight into the situations of the world during that time, and I like to be a part of that, and I like that about comic books, and I like to try to put that in my drawings as well. So yeah, like and then there's debate like at one point was with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and his posturing through that debate was talked about a lot, and I liked to kind of think about that, and to your point with the second point, what I think I contributed, when drawing this, is there is a lot of decisions that the artist can make, and art left to me in kind of the body positions, the body language, the facial expressions, even a lot of the character drawings and designs. He gave me quite a bit of flexibility in that, so I got to be pretty creative. That being said, California is like a really different story than I've typically illustrated. A lot of the books I did up to this point were very kind of extreme in like the fantastic kind of elements, like either a really distant future, or it's like a very much a fantasy element to the sci-fi. Whereas this was very much more grounded in reality, a lot closer to reality than most of it, and a lot of the pages had to be interesting, not because there's a cool looking robot or a really fun explosion. It has to be done in a different way. And I firmly believe that you can do that with really any kind of a good scene. Any well written scene can be exciting to look at. So I had to try different ways of doing that, because, like I said, a lot of the story is discussion and talking, and it comes out in that, and I really enjoyed kind of taking those scenes and trying to be creative with it, and try to bring it out even more than what the dialogue was saying, and inject things like the way someone's moving, and kind of try to get that across through the imagery. I think that's a lot of fun, and I think that gives a lot of the character to the story. And I'm very proud of how I thought a lot about that with this book, and I think it came out great. I really love a lot of the dramatics, and his art's writing has really dramatic upswings in the dramatics in it, and I loved working into that. It's sometimes like making music, and how does that work up? How do you build that climax? And the script was just a lot of fun to be able to do that with.
Can I shine a light on two scenes that Dave did that I just, when you asked that question, it kind of popped into my head. One was uh, when they're lifting Big Sis to into safety, and uh, uh, LB kind of, falls. That the way I wrote it, I couldn't quite, but Dave gave it the feeling of, him fall, and eating it and falling and like losing connection. And he did it in the panels too. That just really sold that moment. So that was an action one, but then an acting one that really got me that Dave did was the one when young Big Sis and young LB were kind of fighting about the homework, and when she throws the glass across the room, and like you feel, I mean, even if you took the dialogue away, you feel it build, and then you feel her frustration, and then like you see her like realizing, and it's like there is some great acting in those pages. Like that, at least for me, those stood out in terms of some of the stuff that Dave did. That is just like I couldn't have written it as good as that. You know what I mean? It's really, really well done.
And even that instance you were talking about earlier with the interrogation, where the interrogator was saying something, you had it scripted, but then it got taken out or inadvertently left out. But that expression of just, hmm, like you understand exactly what that character is processing and feeling at that moment, even though nothing is being said. Yeah, yeah, a lot of great moments. And Dave, I also wanted to compliment you. I feel like you said that Art's writing really went on an upswing within this series, and I feel like your art did too, if I'm being honest. Like there were environmental scenes in issue 1 where I was like, okay, Dave obviously likes to draw people. But then in series issue number 3, there was this like big opening scene to I don't think I'm spoiling things by mentioning this in issue 3. It's a 4 issue miniseries. I won't talk about number 4. But in issue number 3, there's this underground bunker that gets revealed. And that scene really blew me back. Like I sat there and looked at that page and looked at that panel for a while. I'm like, okay, Dave's up in his game. This is incredible. So kudos to
Thank
you
you.
too for, really moving onward and upward as well. Um, but Justin, I don't want to leave you out either because I want to understand your role better as a series editor. Um, it's pretty anomalous to have such a role on an indie comic book. Like there's not a lot of editor credits on self-published comics. So what do your contributions look like when crafting this series?
Yeah, thanks for asking. At a conceptual level, I feel like the role of an editor is kind of to acknowledge that writers are so immersed in the story they're creating that they see it clearly in their head, right? And they're seeing it clearly from the inside out. And I think the role of an editor is really to step in on behalf of that audience and look at it from the outside in and make sure that it is still being conveyed in a clear way, as clear as it feels in the writer's head, and that it's still landing the way you want it to and resonating the way you want it to. So that's kind of my just very high level, like cloud pushing ethos when I approach it. But at a real functional level, it starts with copy editing, right? It's basic spelling, grammar, punctuation, clarity, consistency, sometimes even adjusting the script format, basic proofreading, right? That's that's the most basic sort of editorial responsibility. The part I really like, sort of the second phase, is line editing, which is where you're looking at the tone, the themes, really trying to capture the characters' voices. I look really hard, as we discussed, about how the words just lay on the page and making sure the word count is as concise as possible and going through and doing that dialogue polish. There's definitely examples in this series of, I can remember a couple scenes where Art is channeling the character's voice, and there's one scene in particular in the diner that it gets a little intense, and Alona is got some edge to her, and I feel like in the first draft of the script, Art maybe had that at like an 8 out of 10. And the more I thought about it, I just thought, well, this is kind of her moment to sell the future she wants and to make her plan work. So we're going to dial it up to 11. This dialogue is going to really lean into that edge. So looking for those moments where you can really amplify the character's voice, the creator's voice, that's really fun. It's my favorite part. And then lastly,
Sorry, I know what you're gonna say because I messed up somewhere.
there's I won't bring that up. There is content editing or development editing, and this series was interesting because I did have a chance to do development editing where before Art had even written the scripts, we would grab dinner together and just talk about, wow, there's this idea about California secession, and what could the characters look like, and what would that story structure look like, and what would the plot through line be, and um, what do those character arcs look like? And that's a really rare opportunity for an editor to be involved at basically ground zero from the early conceptual phases. Not to get too far off the track, but I worked on another editorial project recently where the writer had already written the scripts, they had already had the artist do some of the art, and I was brought in to edit after the fact. And there were definitely a couple opportunities where I thought, gosh, if I had been involved in that development phase, I could have caught a lot of these glitches between writer and artist and probably avoided the artist doing some rework. So that was just a very fun part of this project to kind of be there from inception all the way through, campaign fulfillment and beyond. So that's kind of the high level summary of what the editor can do. And I got to do all three on this project, which was really cool.
That's killer.
I can
Art,
vouch for that. Yeah, I've had to do very little reworking, which is really nice. And I appreciate
thank you,
that.
Justin.
I
Thank you.
can. That is a very important part of the creative process that I've learned. Again, I'm going to bring up advertising, but it's just I've always learned and believed that if you bounce something off of somebody, it only gets better. Again, with a grain of salt. But if you don't, you could throw out the seed to a better idea, no matter how bad the idea is first, and it could be the better idea only showed up because you bounced it off of them with even a really bad one could be the seed to a better idea. And Justin was really good about like encouraging things and also making sure we stay on track. So that was fun.
Cool. Yeah. So, Art, I want to bounce off what you're talking about here because I have a related question for you. Justin just told us about his role as an editor, but I want to hear from you about Justin's role because I've seen you both on stage together at Comic-Con International this past summer, and you got kind of emotional talking about Justin and his role in California Inc. So talk to me about that. What is Justin's role in this? How is it so important to what's happening with this series? Why is it getting you emotional? Talk to us.
Well, I mean, this is my first book I've ever written, in terms of long form. Justin and I met at a comic shop. We were just buddies at a comic book shop, just hanging out. And, I knew he was in the business, didn't know until like, I think maybe a couple months after meeting him. And, just over time, we've gotten along. We'd go get lunch, go get dinner every once in a while. And my frustration with advertising is always just kind of short form. Everything's super short, and you work on something for so long to be an expert on it, to speak on the behalf of a client. But everything you do is so short. And so I was like, I do so much research. I want to write something like long form, a fun long story. I love television over movies because you just get that much more time to see something develop and really push through. And Justin was like, write something. I was like, huh?
Mhm.
Me? And then, bat around a couple ideas. And I was like, I really like this. And he's like, then let's do it. And I wouldn't be here if Justin didn't encourage and empower that. So, that's what he means to me. Like we wouldn't have this story. I wouldn't have met Dave unless Justin, because who gets in your way the most is yourself, your own imposter syndrome, your own self doubts. And so Justin was there to go, hey, I mean, we got time. We'll meet. There's no deadline. Let's do this. Let's let me read some of the stuff you wrote down. Let me read that log line. And then after some time, it's like, whoa, we finished 4 issues. It's done. And I mean, we're really good friends now. We're pretty damn close. I can't wait for after 10 years when we have our first internet beef and really hate each other. And then, on whatever platform we're going to be on, or we talk a lot of smack and we'll be on, separate interviews talking about how much we hate each other. I can't wait for that. It's going to be amazing. We're going to be massive, massive, influences, and there's going to be sides. It's going to be great.
Red versus blue.
Oh, orange versus yellow? I don't know.
Oh, yikes. I don't even want to go there. But so it
I'm just
sounds like
picking
this is
random
going to be
colors.
the only interview where all three of you are in the same room together. So excellent. I gotcha. So I want to pull back the camera a little bit for this next question and talk to you about your choice to self-publish this series. I want to know the impetus behind this. Like, was it always your goal? Are you happy you made this choice? And what have been some of the pros and cons of working on this project independently? Because I've heard Art say in interviews that he originally wanted to shop California Inc. around to some publishers, and upon meeting Dave, received some subtle nudges towards
Uh-huh.
self-publishing. So this is a question for all of you. Let's hear it. Let's talk self-publishing. The
Um,
good, the bad, the ugly, the fantastic, the not so
I'll,
fantastic.
I'll give a quick response, and then they could give their how they influenced me. But originally, Justin, I met him, and he's been published by Dark Horse and Stila, so he knows. And to me, that was the way in, which is let's get the first 4 or 5 pages done. Let's get a pitch doc. Let's get some character designs. Show that you have a full creative team, and let's shop it around. And that was awesome. And Dave heard about that, and he's like, "Sure." But in my mind, I wanted to at least get the full issue done, the full first issue done, so that when I pitch it as an unknown, they'll be like, "Oh, not only does he have the first pages, they have the full issue." Um, but also, Dave was like, and I was looking at Dave's work, and like, "Who made these?" He's like, "We did." I'm like, "What does that mean?" He's like, "Self-published." I'm like, that's another language. What are you talking about? Like, so he kind of introduced me to it. And I remember going to a few publishers that I knew. And one guy specifically, Charlie Stickney, was like, you should probably self-publish. It's going to take a lot of time for something to get greenlit and get made. And I sat in on a self-publishing panel. And my switch just went off. I was like, wait a minute, I can control my destiny. It's a lot of work, I get it, but I don't have to wait for, a few months to a year for somebody to say yes, and then another 2 years for them to possibly greenlight it and go, push it out there. I could do this now. The only problem is it's going to cost money and it's going to cost a lot of time, but I'd rather control everything myself. And so I kind of went from there. I mean, and I know you're a big advocate for this, Ryan. You own it all, do it yourself, which is, I've got you on the other side of my ear saying the same thing.
Try not to lead this question too hard, but I think the cat's out of the bag at this point.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of independent publishing. I came from the school of punk rock, so I always had respect for those early punk bands that were doing it themselves. I always thought that was cool, and respected that and thought that was the angle I would want to go at for a lot. If I were to do any kind of creative endeavor. And so, yes, I've done a couple independently published comics. I've really liked it. It's just like Art said, you're in control of everything. You make the decisions, and you also take on the risk. But as the creator of the story, I think that I'm more willing to do that versus trying to convince a publisher who doesn't know me to take a risk on me. And even I don't poo-poo the publisher route. I think that I've seen a lot of people go the independent route, and then it's much easier for a publisher to put some faith in you and put trust in you once they see that you're able to do it on your own without them. So I think that also helps if that's the angle you ultimately want to go at. And I think independent publishing has its limits. Distribution becomes much more challenging. It's not impossible, but it's some of these larger publishers have a much better avenues for that, as well as marketing. So I think they still have their place, especially if you get to a certain level. But as far as trying something out, if you like, Art never wrote anything yet, and so it's a great way to just kind of like get it out there, show that you can do it, and make some money. And while you're at it, it's not a complete. Usually, I think most people I know who do an independent comic, they can at least recuperate what they've kind of put into it. And so that's a lot more than we used to be able to do. And I think the internet has created and Kickstarter and all the social medias. The one good thing about it all is that it's given us a lot more options to kind of make our own destiny.
Yeah, Justin, did you have any input in this?
Yeah, I don't want to dwell too much on my experiences and trauma publishing at big publishers, but
Just a manifesto out there. Just
having done both, I think the takeaway for me is that this, Ryan, like trying to write anything or trying to get anything published anywhere is a gamble, right? And there's so many variables that you can't control. And so I just think if you're going to gamble either way, whether you self-publish or you go with a big publisher. So if you're going to gamble anyway, bet on yourself, right? You know your skills, you bet with the people you know and trust, and you still won't be able to control everything 100%, but you're going to have a greater degree of control and influence over the timeline and the schedule and the marketing you do and the financials. So you're going to have a greater degree of control than you would elsewhere. And for me, that was kind of the big takeaway is that there's some empowering feelings in that of being able to, like Dave said, control your own destiny to a greater degree.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, you know me. I feel like I could talk about this till the cows come home, but I want to keep this focused on you guys and your work. But I don't want to completely zoom back into California Inc. specifically just yet, because with the series coming to a close, I want to touch base on the future for each of you. So, Art, I've heard you mention in interviews that the next Studio 12/7 release is not going to be a creative project of yours, but rather one that's written by Justin and illustrated by Dave. But I've also heard you mention that you might have some more California Inc. stories left in you, like some offshoot stories of Big Sis, I've heard you say. And I want to know what that means. So, Art, does that mean you're going to be using a different artist for the California Inc. offshoot stories while uh, Dave is working with Justin on his series? Or are you
Yeah.
going to be vying for Dave's attention moving forward? Like, what does this mean?
Well, full disclosure, I knew Dave had a pretty busy schedule coming up, including working on, I'm giving it up right now, the book that he's working on with Justin. At first, I was like, "Ugh, I don't know if Dave will have time. I don't want to overwhelm him." And so he and I were chatting one time, and I mentioned this kind of side story I was working on, and I asked him if he was cool if I got someone else to work on it, because this is our project, you know. And Dave was at first kind of like, "Okay, yeah." And then, like, as the phone call kind of went, he's like, "But tell me more about this other story." And I was like, "Oh, am I insulting him?" I think I insulted him. And then I tell him more, and I was kind of like, "Yeah, but only if you're cool." Then, like, I was like, maybe we'll get the person to, like, get some character designs across and get you to approve on them." And Dave's like, "Yeah, yeah." And then, like, as the phone call went, he's like, "But what's the timing on this book?" I'm like, "Oh, do you want to work on it?" And he's like, I was like, "I don't know if you have time." He's like, "I mean, maybe if you're cool." I'm like, "If you have time, let's do it." Because that's people, when you read a book a certain way, if someone leaves, it changes it, and you feel it as an audience member or as a reader. And personally, I love working with Dave. I don't want to shake that up, but also want to be respectful of his time. But once he opened the door, I was like, "Yes, here's the script. Read it. What do you think?" So, yeah. We have another small story that we're working on, smaller footprint story, specifically focusing on the brother and sister. It's a character that I know Justin and I ended up falling in love with these two characters as the story was kind of put together. So when this opportunity came up for me to be part of another anthology, I was like, I want to write this other story that I think it fit, but it'll be in California Inc., but in your anthology. Do you mind if I do that? And of course, the person putting that book together was like, yes, that'd be amazing to include that in an anthology. And that's what we're working on. That's what we're working on. At least that's what Dave and I are working on directly. Justin has edited the first issue already. He hasn't, you know, killed any pages on it.
The
It's a
first
great
issue. So
story.
there's more.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a
And
great story. I mean, I'll just say that first installment, by the end, you're gonna stand up and cheer and take notice. It's a great, engaging story.
fantastic. And what about the project that Justin and Dave are working on together? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's called West Side, and on the surface it's basically a crime drama about two deputy sheriffs investigating a series of unsolved violent crimes. It's kind of in a very bleak, like neo-noir type style, kind of in the vein of what the TV show The Wire did for Baltimore, in that it's kind of more about the place than the people per se. That's sort of the surface level. What it actually is, it's kind of a wireframe for me to be able to inject these authentic autobiographical elements and real world facts with kind of a running voiceover narration in a story about what I call race relations, car culture, and crime in kind of an elegy to my hometown and the little place I grew up in the California Central Valley. So it's kind of a personal story for me because it is very steeped in autobiography, which I know you appreciate, Ryan. And I feel like it's just something that I'm very uniquely positioned to tell. The thought occurred to me that I think I'm actually the only person I'm aware of that is from my hometown that also worked in law enforcement and writes comics. Obviously, there are some people from that town that worked in law enforcement, and there's one very famous creator, J.H. Williams, who's from that town and is a fantastic artist and now sometimes writer. But I'm the only one to do both and have that unique perspective. So I'm really trying to lean into that and just couldn't be more thrilled to have Dave's amazing art for the journey and to kind of switch roles and have Art help out with editing and acting as the publisher now at Studio 12/7.
Great. And Dave, I know that Art sold you on California Inc. with the story initially. I've heard him say a number of times in interviews, you were like, let me read it. And then you said, okay. So I'm guessing you had to read Justin's story. What drew you in here? What made you want to say, yeah, I'm on board for another, what are we talking here? Is this another 4-issue miniseries? How's this take form?
Yeah, I'll jump in on just content.
Yeah.
So I originally wrote this as a 5-issue series, but I think we are going to basically divide that up into two chunks and do 2 volumes of the book. So overall, it'll be, what does that come out to? 110 pages or something, 112 pages. But we'll probably do it in 2 volumes and run 2 campaigns because nobody wants to ask Art to run 5 more campaigns.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's actually interesting. Now that we have kind of a base of an audience, which is kind of nice. We've built it over the last 2.5 years together, the three of us, hoping that you know, I've seen people overwhelm their readers by doing like 8 campaigns in a year. It's like, I mean, it's funny. Comics do come out once a week, right? Or sorry, titles come out once a month. But in the Kickstarter space, 3 in a year is a lot to back one person. It gets overwhelming. But if you give them a nicer chunk, it's easier. And but to get that, you kind of have to build that readership. And so I think Dave and I have that now. And then if you kind of switching roles between myself and Justin, we could kind of, you know, sway them that way. And so we're going to larger volumes, and it's just more bang for the buck for our readers. And it won't kill me as as someone running a campaign. And it's just it's more fun to kind of, at least for I don't know, it's the sign of being old. You want trades. You kind of want the thicker book rather than get all the individual covers. So it's kind of fun that way.
Yeah, I think it'll be a different format. We're planning on doing them in all black and white, so it'll be as an artist, kind of a different kind of way of approaching each page. I haven't done a purely black and white book in a long time. It's actually how I originally wanted to work, but then I got into watercolor usage and really enjoyed it. So I've done a lot of that, but I've done a lot of black and white to begin a while ago. But it'll be fun to kind of go back to that as a finished product. And I've always loved black and white comics, and the darkness of, it's so funny. Both Art and Justin are like the funniest, silliest dudes you'll meet, and they're constantly cracking jokes. But the stories they write are deep.
Then along comes the dystopian
and
futures.
They get dark. They unleash that in their writing, and
That's yeah, that's a good
and
point. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, and I enjoy that. I love how they reach for those kinds of extremes in human emotion. As an artist, I like to try to create those too, and find that a fun and exciting challenge to try to capture people's emotions, and they have unique situations for that. So yeah, it has they definitely, West Side follows California Inc. in tone in a lot of ways in this. And so it'll be fun, and it'll be a different challenge for me. And honestly, like when I met Art, I had met him, but it was at a convention, and so I wanted to read the story first. And I got to know Justin before I read the story that he was working on. And honestly, once you get to know Justin, it's if he was like, I wrote a story, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty cool. he's a insightful dude, and so I'm excited to work with him. And the same would go for you, Art, too. It just happened that our meeting was a little shorter in the beginning. So
It's funny you mentioned the black and white thing. I forgot to mention that the story, which just let you know, probably the next 2 years, Dave's going to be in a very moody mood because both my story and Justin's new story are very noir. Very, both this the next story that we're doing together, Dave and I, for California is black and white as well, very moody. So he might grow his bangs really long and like hang him down and get really. I don't know. He's gonna be really, really, yeah, we got to keep him happy.
Well, Dave, let me try to pull you out of Hot Topic here for a minute and ask you another art question. So you said you're shifting from color to black and white. Very interesting to me. I've kind of grown an affinity to this like watercolor look of yours on California ink. So are you talking black and white, like strictly black and white ink? Or are you talking about like ink washes? There's going to be grayscaling going on. What's that going to look like for you as the artist moving forward?
I definitely plan to try to be creative with it, and utilize the various ways that you can use just black and white. So to answer your question, there's a couple different types of scenes going on, and especially in Art's book, he's got you go back and forth between kind of the present and the past, and he wants kind of different ways to reflect those two types. So I have a couple ideas that I'm working on as far as the styles that I'll be playing with. And some of them would be one of them would definitely be using some sort of like I really liked Will Eisner always used like dirty water to kind of get some gray washes, and I like to do that too even when I am working in color, but it's a fun element to be able to work with. But I've also and I'm not sure I'm going to roll with this, but I'm planning on experimenting with it. I've seen, and I at one point I loved just working with ballpoint pen, like literally a ballpoint pen, and so like the cheapest one you'd find at like a Kinko's or something. And I thought it would be fun. I've been playing around with one for again, and just kind of enjoying how much you can kind of get from such a simple tool. And I thought it might be a fun one to at least kind of start the page with, emphasis of the ballpoint pen and maybe some other elements of gray in there too. But
Do we
uh,
have timelines for any of these series, either the California Ink or was it called West Side, Justin?
Yes.
Okay.
California Ink are the Kickstarter for that anthology that's part of will be launching in March, mid to late March. And then I think Justin and Dave are still. You could talk about your timeline.
Yeah, I think tentatively Dave will probably start art sometime in March. So the whole series will be done a week later.
What the? Oh
help me,
man.
Ryan.
Dave implodes.
They've got me chained here.
Hey Dave, real quick. I just my favorite thing to do is collect hotel pens and draw with them. And I've been doing that a lot lately. And when you brought that up, like ballpoint, like just how, I mean, it's something that I always tell people. It's like it doesn't matter what you're using. It's kind of like I could have the most expensive guitar, doesn't make me a good guitar player. You know what I mean? I could have the best paint set, doesn't mean I could paint. And so I've been challenging myself to use just a pen to go back to basics and see what kind of things, because I've been trying to draw more every day. It's like what can I lay on the page with just the ballpoint pen? Because you can sketch and then get really dark lines with them, and it has a fun character. I just love it. I'm excited to see what you're going to put together, even if for yourself, even if you just do some drawings. I'm pumped to hear about that, and I want to see some of those pieces you crank out.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend when I was in college in San Francisco, but this was back when raves. I guess they're kind of cool again, but they were really cool when I was in college. And I had a friend who he worked for a rave production company. They weren't really a company. It was all it was all the underground stuff. But he made the flyers. He made the most amazing flyers, and they were all with ballpoint pen. And you would have never guessed it looking at them. They looked, and I think the time, like the flyers for a lot of these raves, they kind of favored these really bold, very like saturated colors. And he's doing these carefully rendered ballpoint pen images, but they just looked so amazing. They were so distinct, and it's always been something that's kind of been in my head to kind of want to go back to doing, because we started working. He kind of influenced me to play around with them, and we would do a lot of that at that time. I guess he would say he was more mentoring me when working with a ballpoint pen. But yeah, it's always been something I've wanted to kind of go back to.
You remember that exercise in drawing school where contour where you couldn't lift the pen and everything's just one line? I'm expecting that now for California Ink other story. Just ballpoint, never lifting the pen per page.
Ugh.
Ryan's like, I don't know about that.
So steering it back to California Inc., you have a currently running Kickstarter right now for the whole gosh darn series, issues 1 through 4. So before we sign off, can you tell us what you're excited about on this Kickstarter? What should people look for? What should we see here? What do you want to direct us to?
Oh, you well that uh, you can get all four. That's what it is. I don't know how many times I've jumped on a Kickstarter because I heard about it later. You know, they're into issue 7, and I get on to go, oh, maybe I can get a catch-up version of it because I'm just hearing about it, and I see only issue 7. I'm like, ugh. Well, I'm not going to go in. It's like jumping into a TV show that's serial, and you just only catch the last 3 episodes. Or if you're like Justin, you watch the final episode of Breaking Bad and call it and say it sucks. Um,
Calling you out. Ouch.
Am I wrong? Am I wrong, Justin? Um, but yeah, what's nice is you can jump in and collect all four. If you're missing issues 3 and 4, you can get 3 and 4 both digitally and physically. So it's friendly to you.
Cool. Well, hopefully, if folks are unaware from people that know me, that will help get you into this series. I can vouch for it. I've read all 4. It's worth it. I hope you jump on board. Justin, Art, Dave, it was such a pleasure to talk with each of you today. I can't wait to get the physical copy in my hands. So congratulations on wrapping this series. I know it's been a long time coming, and yeah, I don't know what to say, but kudos. I've read it, and I'm so excited for it. I hope other people give it a chance too.
Yeah, thanks for
Thanks.
supporting us since day one, and since I met you with the script walking around Comic Con, going, okay, so I'm at Comic Con, I have it. What do I do with it? Yeah.
This is such a cool full circle, man. I'm so proud of you. I'm so psyched for every single one of you, and I'm psyched for the new readers too. I sincerely want them to pick it up and give this series a chance. And now's a great time. So link in the show notes of today's episode, and I guess that'll do it, guys. So thank you so much for coming on the Ryan Claytor Patreon podcast. It was wonderful to have you here. Maybe we can have you back for West Side or California Inc. again, or we'll figure out something.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Sounds good.
Ryan.
That's Ryan.
Yeah, appreciate it. Appreciate you taking the time. It's a pleasure to talk to you about this. And yeah, I've looked at your history in independent comics, and yeah, I'd love to pick your brain more about that too, because it sounds like you got a huge wealth of knowledge on that subject.
Let's make it happen. I'd love to chat.
Yeah, definitely.